What is the theory of constraints, otherwise known as TOC? In this 5-minute presentation, we'll review this popular idea framework created by Israeli business guru and writer Eli Goldratt, who for the last several decades has helped organizations and leaders think critically about ways to improve thoroughgoing business processes and systems toward optimized performance, enhanced productivity, and increased profits. Now, in this first slide, we can begin to see the power of this framework. These visuals represent different components of an organization, from manufacturing to junctures along the supply chain to scenes from within boardrooms and amongst teams. But if we were trying to improve, where would we begin? In a presentation about TOC, Elise said that he could summarize this framework with just one word: focus. Rather than trying to make minor adjustments across the board that ultimately wouldn't make a major difference toward goal accomplishment or moving the bottom line, TOC looks to identify the key constraint, the weakest link. So here's an overview of TOC's 5 focusing steps, which will apply to a case shortly afterwards. 1, we identify the constraint. 2, we exploit it. 3, we subordinate everything to it. 4, we elevate the performance of the constraint. And then 5, we repeat the process. As promised, let's look at a case study to synthesize these steps. Consider the storied NBA franchise, the Los Angeles Lakers, who, as of Wednesday, February 8th, were helplessly staring at the likelihood of another missed postseason. Let's use TOC. Remember that focusing graphic? Here's a visual comparable for the Lakers. We see players, coaches, training staff, and management. And yet between pundits, fans, and social media feeds, many declared that any hopes of success from the onset of the season were being prevented by one individual, perennial all-star Russell Westbrook. Step 1, as we've said, is to identify the constraint. And for many, it's been a foregone conclusion that Russell is the weakest link. But how does TOC work once you've focused on the perceived bottleneck or performance obstacle? Well, the next step sounds pretty harsh. You exploit the constraint. In TOC, to exploit just means to attempt at all costs to reanalyze the constraint, its nuances and complexities, and then brainstorm workarounds to extract better performance or determine if there are obvious ways to improve that have somehow been overlooked. In this case, note Coach Ham spending considerable time with Westbrook. Thirdly, after we've done that, we look to subordinate everything else to the constraint. This means everything around and in relation to the constraint is re-examined. We're asking, are other players, coaches, and parts functioning at their best? Are there ways for them to contribute to the alleviation of the constraint, or more positively, to contribute to its transformation? Fourthly, we aim to elevate the performance of the constraint via new mechanisms and measures. And by this point, after thorough analysis of the constraint itself and all connected parts, we have to implement actions that can be measured against the previous status quo. And when we look at Russell, he was actually removed from the starting 5, something that seems unfathomable across his 15-year career. Now, generally with TOC, if we're successful at this point, we look to repeat the process by going after the next weakest link. Yet at this midway point in the season, all the energy expended on fixing Russ hadn't translated to more wins or better team performance. So, in TOC fashion, critical thinkers should ask in another iterative step, is the problem elsewhere? Was Russ actually the critical constraint? What about Coach Ham? What about consistent injuries and availability of Anthony Davis? What if the athletic training department and its strategies had wrongly gone unscrutinized? Or was it some fault of owner Jeannie Buss or a lack of urgency from GM Rob Pelinka? And TOC leaders must reckon with all possibilities, which leads us to this. What if we looked at LeBron James? Is it really possible that the world's greatest player could somehow be the constraint? TOC analysis might not determine that he himself is a constraint. However, a closer look surely identifies something other than Russ, I think: roster construction. Despite LeBron's greatness, the most successful stretches in his career were made possible by specialized role players, strong defensive wings, and great shooters, which wasn't the makeup of the Lakers roster. Fans and onlookers could point fingers at Westbrook, but this was too oversimplified, which leads to our summary. TOC is a strong framework because it cautions and consults us to resist our biased inclinations in business, management, and in general, as flawed human beings, to find an easy scapegoat. So the next time you're analyzing an organizational plan or company's performance, remember TOC, but as we saw with the Lakers, make sure you have data-backed reasons that supersede your gut instincts or whatever the masses are tweeting.